And I thought the first thing we should do is go over the things that you did change, that are highlighted in yellow.
That was my plan as well.
Oh, good. And we do know that both Joe and Jason have other meetings, and you're going to try to come.
I talked to both of them. I thought I made it clear to them both, but this is clear since it's being the master plan for the entire community should take precedent over the school boards, but that's just kids. But so they made their decision where they stand and what they feel is most important for the future of the community. They both give me one of those speeches that the children are our future, I guess. So they're at the school board and depending on how long that takes.
They're getting a free dinner.
Oh, they get fed there?
Yes.
Well, I don't know.
No wonder they're going to be sad. Actually, I know Jason's the chair, so he doesn't have much stress.
Just real quick,
It's for the work
Katarine and Chris, your mics are the worst out of everybody's.
session. Okay.
So if you lean back, you can't, with this air conditioning, even though it's not that big, you cannot hear a thing.
Okay.
Everybody up there is fine. You can hear that, but these mics are so poor.
Okay. Thank you.
No, sorry,
Hon.
Yeah, no, like I said, when you're sitting straight, we can hear you.
Okay.
But as soon as you lean back, it's done.
Okay, well, even though this isn't a formal public meeting where any action is being taken, just for the record, I was making jokes about both Jason and Joe.
Oh, have we joined in? No, I'm.
When it's your turn, when they ask for public comment, you can make
That's
whatever
it.
jokes you want.
Sounds good.
So,
As long as they're tasteful
We'll keep it in love.
and it's understood that you're joking.
All right, then I'll stop.
so you can see the sections that are in yellow on the screen are the things that we're going to review first. Obviously, the first one was really putting in the word contiguous, talking about contiguous open space. So that
With a
was
particular emphasis on contiguous.
acceptable. Did anybody, first of all, does anybody have particular things they'd like to comment on in the yellow comments, yellow changes?
Well, let's go down each
Just
one
go-
and we can address.
Not there. Oh, one thing on page 2, objectives under goal 2A, coordinate with appropriate state and county agencies to ensure that Franklin Township's policies and land use regulations, you have to finish the sentence, are consistent.
I know I do that all the time. I start writing one sentence and then I think, oh, I gotta go back to this and then I go to that and then I forget. That just was are consistent with state and county policies and you're not violating. So I can update that.
Yeah, it's just a minor thing. Okay, on page 3, which is goal 3, maintain a safe and attractive residential environment for current and future residents to enjoy. Under the objectives, E, encourage innovative and creative techniques for managing stormwater runoff, including the promotion of rain gardens. Stormwater basins should be viewed as opportunities for enhancing the aesthetics of a property rather than simply utilitarian. I like that.
Okay, if I may one statement on that real quick, because that wasn't brought up. I don't remember who mentioned that. That was a public comment about wanting to see stormwater basins be attractive rather than just ugly holes in the ground that occasionally have some water in them. I don't know exactly how this might translate into any sort of actual ordinance, because there's state requirements for stormwater management that are pretty strict, and then the Pinelands has their own new standards. So I wouldn't want to put in any sort of requirements in an ordinance that would contradict anything in the state and Pinelands requirements. But this is something that, if it's part of the master plan, something even the planning board or zoning board can point to, and let applicants or developers know that they should be doing stormwater basins from an aesthetic sense as well as the utilitarian sense of dealing with treating storm water. But I don't know that it's something we can formally put into the code that says all stormwater basins have to be attractive or they have to be rain gardens, because depending on the soils, depending on how much you're draining and other things, you might not be able to do what you typically consider a rain garden to be more attractive.
So when the applicant, when there's an application and they present to us the plans and you review it, as part of your response, and if you see that there's a rain basin there, can part of your response be to remind them of that, or do
Yes,
you do that?
and
Do you do that as a matter of course?
in general, we kind of do that. We have, well, Ed reviews as the engineer, and I assume that the zoning board engineer does the same when they're reviewing an application. They're checking to make sure it's completely in compliance with the state regulations. And then if it's a major site plan or subdivision to where they're actually providing a landscaping plan, our landscape architects will also be looking at it, and they'll be making comments You're asking for the seed basin mix, specifying as well as the aesthetics of the site. So to a large degree, we already are doing that, but this just enforces it, or I shouldn't say enforces it, encourages it through the master plan and reinforces the idea. But again, I have to stress, I don't know that it's something we can completely codify in terms of an actual, somewhere in section 253 of the code, it's going to specifically say that all stormwater basins have to be beautiful.
But we can remind them.
You can remind them of that to the extent that they are requiring variances or design waivers for any sort of buffer or other landscaping requirements, then that does give you a little bit of leverage to say, if you can make your stormwater basins more attractive, maybe that's justification for your buffer only being 20 feet instead of 25.
I just built a property up in Pennsylvania. Had to put a rain garden in. And part of it was the plants, basic, stone, certain kind of plants, that based on all of my impervious coverage.
Okay.
And that was part of the ordinance.
Okay,
And
I'm curious, what town was that in?
Lake Harmony,
Harmony, okay, that's way up there.
Carbon County.
Is there any way that we can at least like find out what they can do? I know that was one of my biggest frustrations with Randall Aaron's books. He had all these fabulous ideas for stormwater and community septic and all that, and then you find out the state won't let you do it. But what will they let you do that we could maybe consider? Is there anybody
But
that
actually,
knows?
there's a checklist of 9 different components that they're supposed to.
I'll tell you, like,
Take
I
a look
built,
at.
I built a lot, and a lot of times we have dry wells, you know, we have all the things underground, that you can't really see, and they end up not working.
Oh,
you know.
well, that's what,
And where a rain garden's different, you know if it's working. You'll know if it's working. And you can put in new ones, the types of plants, the length, the depth, all of that. And it does become attractive because you have to have a certain amount of plants for the size of the actual rain garden. And I'll tell you what, on like a 1,700, 1,800 square foot house, a typical house you're gonna build, you really are diverting all that water into this little rain garden. That becomes part of really the house that you're selling.
it actually makes it more attractive, but there is
I think it
a
does.
requirement to go through a set of options and
Yes.
figure out how you're
Well,
gonna retain the
Right.
stormwater on the site. So, I
Well,
mean,
that's a grading plan that tells you how to do that.
not just, no, there's a
Yeah,
stormwater.
Oh, yeah.
the stormwater regs do have give you a list of options, and that could be something I can talk to Ed about it tomorrow in terms of as we're reviewing, it could be, I mean, instead of just going through the list of are they satisfying all the requirements, we can make suggestions of you could still satisfy the requirements, but it might also look better if you're doing more of a rain garden type of basin rather than a dry well. or
And
whatever.
actually, you could probably do it as, I'm a builder, all right? So I'm looking at trying both ways. One is, if you're building a 1,500, 1,700 square foot house, does a rain garden really come into play? But if you're building a like a 2,500 to 3,000 bigger house, it might come into play, where it might be beneficial for the neighbors and then like a 1,500, 1,700 square foot house might be, you know, enough land where it's going to dissipate anyway.
What I can do, without further going into this, I think we're all generally on the same page here. I want to encourage attractive basins. But since one of the recommendations later on, when we haven't discussed yet, is a more comprehensive landscaping requirements overall. And that could be part of the landscaping requirements is suggested planting mixes and planting styles and, for stormwater management basins.
On page 5,
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry to interrupt, but I know what the state's requirements are, and the reason I'm bringing this up is I manage a business in Elk Township, and we had to put it, when we put an addition on, the state required a 10-foot by 50-foot by 10-foot deep runoff area in the event of a 100-year rain. The township required us to do a 15-foot deep by 50-foot wide by 150-foot long. They went way above the state's requirements. And they said they were allowed to do that. That was entirely in their power to make it bigger than what the state's a bare minimum. And I have no problem with it. Back then I did, because of the expense. I mean, we actually had to have 38 dump trucks to load the stone in there. But it's the fact that when I look at it now and the flooding that goes on, that's happening across the state in different areas, it's actually a good thing, because it's dry as a bone all the time. We never have an issue, and none of the neighbors do. So is there a way the town can do better in some areas that where, it looks like it would need better? I'm not talking about a standard, but, mandatory requirement for more. But being the out township can do it, I don't know why we couldn't. If there's something that could be done, to help benefit an area that already has flooding.
The simple answer is yes. If Franklin Township wants to go above and beyond DEP or Pinelands requirements, you are allowed to do so, provided that the standards that you're are implementing are still reasonable.
Right.
And not, what's the term, arbitrary and capricious, or
Right.
you're not, that it's, basically as long as it's still reasonable, yes, the township can if they wish.
And I look at like the stormwater area when they show, when you look at the overlay. You look at that area, and there's some areas that are so wet all the time, and certain areas are completely dry, but they're in the same zone for the same requirements, where they should be different. Where this one requires a more stringent, where this one can probably go with the state minimum, and that's why I was asking.
I can say, yes, the town is allowed to do that, and we, in a couple of the other towns, we do work, and we have worked with some towns in implementing some stricter standards. And that's, if this board wants, we can make that suggestion, but it's really a policy decision on the township's part if they want to go above and beyond. I mean,
Can you do it a different way and sort of look at how well the site might drain? So if it drains more slowly, maybe more strict guidelines. If it drains okay, then
certainly, I mean,
It's always a function of the soils, and that's
Yeah.
something that.
Right.
to put it this way, these specifics of how that would get implemented is really more of an engineering thing. I don't do the stormwater reviews myself, so I can't sit here and say this is exactly how we would do it. But the basic concept of you are allowed to go above and beyond the state minimum requirements is a valid point.
There's everybody on a topo.
Have been flooding lately.
Right.
But he was gonna tell you what to do.
Well, that's what I mean, and I'm not saying it wouldn't work,
And you know, if you're like this, and
Yeah.
everything's going to your neighbor, you have to do something. It's got to be a berm, it's got to be firewall.
Right. I look at the top of Pennsylvania Avenue, everything runs downhill. That requires a bare minimum. But you get on either end of Pennsylvania, on the other end, it
But
needs,
the lot,
maybe you say it'd be
Come up.
subject to
Right.
how.
dictate.
It should, right.
Right.
That's what I'm asking.
That would determine, and that covers you, based on results of those tests.
There's something the result of the
sounds like it's liquid in the air conditioning.
whether or not there would be more
Yeah,
stringent
right, so, yeah,
than the state requirement. Okay.
I think we should look at the state requirements and then, and discuss this again. Because I don't think we can answer that question right now, whether there's a need for it to be stricter. Because it is always something you calculate based on the soils and the site itself. So I'm not sure how much you can make anything stricter, but as long as you're maintaining the minimum state standards, but you may not need to, is all that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, if you, your basic requirement is the state requirement, right? And then, but then when you do your permit testing, if it shows that it's overly, it's much more slower than other areas, then maybe that's when you implement harder or stricter guidelines.
Yes, and some of that may be in the regulations already. And they changed them. I knew the first
Changed
set
it
really
6
well,
months.
but the second, the revision has some differences to the original ones in the stormwater standards, the stormwater requirements. I'd like to just take a look at them again.
Thank you.
Let's go on to page 5. This is now under goal 7, the alternative energy. I recognize the need for alternative energy sources, and it's number 7. Township should consider reducing the minimum requirements for accessory solar energy systems. 50-foot buffer requirement and the minimum lot area of 3 acres are excessive, and a hindrance to the practical use of solar energy as an accessory use on residential properties. Accessory solar energy systems should be subject to the same setback and buffering requirements as other permitted accessory structures. And that seemed like a good way of putting it.
That's as far as I recall what the conversation was.
It's fairly clear too.
Yeah, we're not saying exactly what they should be, just that they should be similar to the others. Okay, so we have no changes there. This is under number, on page 6, number 9. We're still under the same goal 7. But this one is, well, I'm not sure that they all pertain to alternative energy sources. Number 9 has to do with lot sizes and setbacks. So recommended standards for development on pre-existing legally established undersized lots. If you can see it up there, A, B, C, D, E, no minimum lot area requirement, minimum front yard of 45 feet. This is what they are now, right?
No, this is, what was
Oh, I'm
this?
sorry, these are the recommended.
Yeah,
Minimum
recommended.
front yard, 45 feet, minimum side yard, 15, 35 feet total, minimum rear yard, 40 feet, maximum lot coverage, 20%
So what this is, if I can explain,
for existing, okay.
this is sort of the average. So the current code is, it says if you're an existing undersized lot, you're supposed to be allowed to develop under the provisions of the previous R1, R2, and R3 district standards, which are no longer found anywhere within your code, but there are a few hard copies floating around. Both Jason and the zoning official Chase were kind enough to email me a copy of those. And also, I'm pretty sure somewhere we have a copy of your old zoning map to see where those properties would have fallen, in which district they were in. But rather than having to look at old codes and old zoning maps, I literally just took sort of the average of those standards. The R1, R2, R3 were not a lot different. They vary in size from, I think, 30,000 to 45 or 50,000, the minimum lot area. And then the bigger lots, you had slightly larger setbacks of 50 feet, and the smaller lots 40 feet. And same thing with the side and rear yard. And the max lot cover range from 15% to 25%. So to just kind of simplify that, since there's not that many existing undersized lots, and to give them something to go on. I just took the average of those three and it would apply across the board. Since it's an existing undersized lot, you really can't tell someone they're not allowed to build on an existing undersized lot if it was legally established. Or just wipe away any minimum lot area requirements.
So what was the existing minimum front yard?
It depends. I think it's, I don't have them in front of me, so I don't think I printed them out.
I just want to try to get an idea.
I think it was for the R1, it was 50 feet. For the R2, it was 45, and for the R3, it was 40. And that's the old standards that the existing undersized lots were allowed to develop under. We got to identify which district they were in previously and then look at those standards. So I literally just took the average of the three, and that's what these are. Which were very close to the R2.
Do they have to have frontage on an actual road?
Well, that's already part of the code, yes.
Okay.
How many recommended standards for new lots created via minor subdivision? Lots in construction associated with minor subdivision should follow the requirements for a conventional lot subdivision, which requires the 1.5 acre minimum.
That is what we have been doing, at least at the planning board, and previously when Cindy was at the zoning board, what we have been doing anyway. But it's not really clear in the code. If you're not doing a major subdivision, it's not really conventional lot subdivisions. That's one of the subtypes of subdivision that's permitted in the RA district. But we've been looking at that anyway, where if you had a 4 acre property and you wanted to subdivide, we have been essentially holding that the minimum lot size was the 1.5 acres, so you could do a maximum of two lots there. And then using the setback requirements for a conventional lot subdivision, which I think are 75 feet front yard, maybe 100 feet rear yard, and 30 or 40 side yards, although I might be wrong there. The other issue that had been brought up to me before, because it's not in the code in the RA district at least, there is no maximum lot coverage unless you're doing one of the like more cluster hamlet subdivisions, but the conventional lot subdivision didn't have a maximum lot coverage. So I used what was the strictest standard of the old R1, 2, and 3 districts of 15%. I think that would be the most suitable or appropriate for a 1.5 acre new lot in the RA district, or constructing on an existing lot that already is an acre and a half.
Pinelands talks about maximum coverage of 10%, correct?
Yeah, so the RA district is outside the Pinelands, so it wouldn't, there would be, shouldn't be any
What we're
conflict.
talking about right now has nothing to do with lots within the Pinelands,
No, the
correct?
RA district is only outside the Pinelands.
Chris, can I go back to the,
Yeah.
the other one we were talking about, these standards, these minimum lot size and the front side, the A through E. So with these recommended changes, do we know whether or not these changes would resolve variances that have been asked for?
And that would all depend on each condition. This would simply give you a set of standards in the code so you can see. It would depend on a case-by-case basis. If somebody had an existing 30,000 square foot lot and they wanted to build with a 10-foot front yard setback, then no, they would still require a variance. But this is really more an issue of clarifying what is required as opposed to it's something that's been an issue where their variances have been required multiple times.
Is there a minimum lot frontage on a street?
No, for this particular provision, we're talking about existing undersized lots, so we're trying to avoid the situation where somebody has to get a variance for a condition that was pre-established.
So even if it was like a pre-existing flag lot, it would be okay?
If it's an existing lot, we're essentially grandfathering in the existing lots. If you're creating a new lot, yes, there are standards for minimum lot frontage. I want to say it's 100 feet in the RA district. It might be more than that, though.
You used the term all pre-existing legally established.
I want to make it clear we're talking about.
Right.
Technically speaking, we don't usually do this all the time, but anytime somebody's trying to make the case that whatever they're proposing is a pre-existing condition, technically speaking, the burden of proof to establish that it was legally pre-existing is on whoever's making the application. Usually, if you can go back on Google Maps or any other document, see that it's been there for a long time, we don't go through the exercise of formally establishing that house that looked clearly had been there for 75 years was put in place before the RA district standards. But I do want to make it clear, we're talking about legally established lots and not just something where somebody comes in and says, yeah, my mom gave me half this property and then I gave the other half to my son, things like that. Something where clearly the lot was established whether by a subdivision approved by the planning board last year, or they were granted a variance for minimum lot area, or it's just that lot was established in 1935 on the tax maps, and it's been that way ever since. For whatever reason, however it got to be that way, we're not necessarily questioning, but assuming it's a legally established lot, you have to allow some buildable rights. This is establishing some.
Historically, we changed from a 1 acre legally established RA lot to a 1.5 in 2004. So any pre-existing lot designed and went through the planning board prior to '04 would be a legally established lot.
If it was 1 acre.
If it was 1 acre or larger.
Or if they were granted a variance,
Or granted a
you are
variance.
allowed to ask.
And now that person today, when we have 1.5 acres, wants to do something and it doesn't meet, well, technically, under our new regs, it will be.
Yes, that's the general intent here, is that you're not requiring somebody to go to the zoning board for something that is a pre-existing legally established condition.
There are smaller lots that go back to the 20s, but
There are smaller ones in lots of locations in the township, but they do have, they were legally established.
Do you all have microphones?
We're all talking
Can you get close when anybody publicly speaks? We can't hear everything. We have a sound system in this courtroom, and we have microphones. I would appreciate if everybody could speak into the
Perhaps
mic.
move over to the other side, because you seem to be able to hear.
Yeah, right now it seems to be working on this side.
Well, like Jim, I couldn't hear Jim. Do you have a microphone you're speaking?
There's one here, there's one here, so we should be able to hear you.
You move it close to so we can hear
Then
everything?
get closer to your mouth, maybe.
Yeah, like you're on stage or something. Take the stage.
Okay, on to number 10. This is about accessory structures and garages. Definition of a private garage should be amended. And the current definition is given here. Either a freestanding accessory structure not exceeding a height of 15 feet, or an area within a principal structure that is designed or used to provide for parking or storage of a total of no more than 3 motor vehicles, and in which no occupation, service, or business is carried on. The total area of private garage space on any lot shall not exceed 1,200 square feet. Well, practically every other variance that comes in is for a separate structure that exceeds 1,200 square feet. And if you count the garage attached to the house, then you have a problem. So your following comment, because any reference to the size of an accessory structure or private garage or number of vehicles should be removed from the definition of the term within the code. Definitions should be limited to identifying and defining terms and should in general be free of any regulatory language. Regulatory language regarding height, size, or restrictions should be located within an appropriate section of the code. It should also be codified that any private garage that is attached to a principal structure is considered a part of the principal structure, should not be included in any calculations regarding maximum height or size of a private garage that is an accessory structure. And then it goes on, number 11, accessory structures such as garages and pole barns should be permitted up to a certain size based on a sliding scale, with larger accessory structures being permitted on larger properties. And you can see the chart up there. Less than half an acre of property, every 1,200 square feet would be maximum. Half acre to 1 acre, 1,500 square feet, 1 acre to 2 acres, 2,000 square feet, and greater than 2 acres, 3,000 square feet. And buildings used for agricultural purposes on farm assessed land should be exempt from these building area standards, but should conform to minimum setback requirements. And then 12 deals with setbacks for accessory structures, which should be revised or permitted to be less than the required setbacks for principal structures in each district. Current code requirements for accessory structures in section 253-91, I guess it is, note that they are prohibited from a front yard and must be set back a minimum of 10 feet from any property line unless otherwise noted. Standards otherwise vary by zoning district as to how far back an accessory structure must be located from a property line. Similar to the recommendation regarding the size, minimum required setbacks should also be viewed on a sliding scale, with larger structures requiring greater setbacks. And then there's a table for that, which has been pulled up, and you can just read it. I'm getting tired of reading it. And I thought they were all really.
So simply there, we had a discussion that you want to have a bigger accessory structure, you need a bigger lot, and you should be set back further. And I don't know, does anybody have any comments on these specifics of these sizes? There's one of the few areas I think.
You're gonna cut back on a lot of people going to zoning boards.
Yeah.
I'm sure Jason would have a few comments on this.
And getting passed.
The biggest proponent of deciding what sizes he thought were appropriate. So I'd be curious what his input is on these.
My comment, in the next 10 years, this will be our new working formula. And should we need to change it, we'll do it 10 years from now when we next revisit.
You mean when they get bigger?
Whenever.
Well, the one we, the size, if it's attached, will have that.
In the gates.
Generally, no. The way most towns that I've worked in, always, if you have a garage, whether it's a 6-car garage or a 1-car garage, if it's attached to the house, it's considered a part of the principal structure. It's still an accessory use because the parking of a car is not the primary use of the property. The dwelling is the primary use of the property. But if it's attached to the principal structure, it's a part of the principal structure and then has to adhere to all of the requirements for the principal structure.
And all the
Setback, height. If you're interpreting the code that a garage has a maximum height of, whatever it says, 15 feet, and you have an attached garage that is part of your house and you have bedrooms above it, then your building height is going to be 25 to 30 feet, and that's part of the garage. It's triggering a lot of potential variances here that are really unnecessary.
In our zoning map, I noticed how they measure the height of a garage, which I have no idea where it came
That's for the
from.
gable end.
Right through the middle of the gable, as opposed to the header or as opposed to the peak.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Why is that done?
I'd have to look at your definition of building heights. I haven't looked at that in a while, but there's essentially.
The building height definition is to the center of the point between the header and the ridge.
Okay, so essentially the midpoint on the slope.
Midpoint on the gable.
And we have a separate definition just for measuring a garage?
That's the diagrams that are given, isn't it?
Well, that's how you figure out your height.
I know that, but isn't
But
there,
by itself, it's the same about building a house.
Okay, but,
Is
okay,
it?
then, I'd have to
it's
look
not
into
the
it
top
further.
of the roof, it's the building height.
But however you're defining building height should be consistent for accessory structures and primary structures. That if you have a peaked roof, whether it's the primary structure or the accessory structure, you should be measuring it in the same way. Either whether it's the average grade right at the perimeter, at the foundations, or the average grade within 5 feet, and then either to the peak of the roof or to the midpoint of the roof. One of the two, but it should be the same for
We're
all
using
structures.
midpoint, correct?
Yeah, because I think in Glassboro, when I built that one on Oakwood, I had to put a flat roof on it. Because
To meet the
they
standard.
took it from the peak.
Oh,
Okay,
That's what I've always understood it was based on a flat roof design.
Yeah.
And then anything above that is considered, just extra.
It
They were
depends on what town
based-
you go in,
Right.
I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, every town is a little bit
A
different.
little bit different, and once you get your packet, you'll see how they,
An interesting story. I don't think I've seen this done in any town I've worked in, but a book I had to read in grad school, written by somebody who kind of literally wrote the book on how to get around zoning regulations. And this is why some towns say that you measure the height from the average grade within 5 feet of the perimeter of the property as opposed to right at the base. He was an attorney who wrote the book, and he said he had a client that was building a rather large house. I think they called it a starter McMansion or something like that. And they're gonna be in violation of the building height requirements, whatever town they were in, by like 2 feet. So instead of reducing the height of the house, they just,
We build around.
within a couple of feet, they built a little mound around the house of 2.5 feet high. So now the height of the house measured from that mound was 5 or 6
I
feet
did that
below the
I
maximum.
did that in Lake Harmony. I've been doing Lake Harmony.
So you got the house sitting on a little podium that is effectively 40 feet high, but getting measured because it.
You can go where the doors are, it comes down.
So there's always clever people who will try and find ways around however you define things. But my recommendation would be, and I'll have to look into it, that however you're measuring building height should be the same across the board regardless of what the structure is used for.
I agree with your language in striking out 3 motor vehicles. Just leave that out of the calculation. Just
I
do
don't
size.
know, frankly, as I've said before, a big issue with it is that since it's in the definition, if you technically then have more than 3 vehicles, it's not a private garage anymore. You would require a use variance for a 4-car garage because it's not a garage under your definition, which is frankly silly. Whether or not there's a justification for limiting the size of a garage or the size of a building is one argument, but it really should not be in the definition of a garage.
Okay, on to 13, which is accessory storage should be permitted provided that it is within an enclosed structure. This pertains to storage in a business district. And at the moment, might require a use variance in order to have a shed or pole barn for storage purposes. So this changes that requirement, or eliminates it, I guess.
Well, this was, we had discussed nearly a month ago now. That right now accessory storage is not permitted in the business district. So if somebody wanted to essentially put in a pole barn, which plenty of businesses around here do, in the business district, that could be interpreted as needing a use variance. So if we simply say that storage is permitted, and then the discussion, as I recall, was that, well, yeah, we're okay with storage, but we want them piling crap outside. We wanted to make sure it's in an enclosed area. So that would just specify that storage is permitted so long as it's in an enclosed space. And they're not, you don't have, in an auto repair business piling tires all over the place.
We're piling up swimming pools.
Or piling up.
15 is about revising the definitions of major and
Oh,
minor
if I can
development.
actually jump in really quick there. You do notice I did delete number 14, because even though we had talked about that, I don't know why I didn't realize this, and it hit me as I was doing my review for the solar applications. We put down as one of their waivers they required is that they didn't have sidewalks. And as I was reviewing that, I was thinking, I just talked to the subcommittee about how we need to require sidewalks everywhere, but I had already noticed, the last review I did for the town was I noticed that that's already a requirement in the code. So I must have been thinking about some other town when I wrote that in here. You already do require that.
Okay,
It says for all developments, sidewalks shall be required.
All major.
All major developments, yes.
yeah.
Which is exactly what we were talking about, what we wanted to be in the code, that's already there. But I did not quite do my homework on that one. Or I did
So
somebody else's homework, I don't know.
15 is definitions of major and minor development subdivisions and site plans to clarify what they are. A lot of overlap between the definitions now. Do you want?
It's hard to read. I think
Well-
it's hard to read.
Definition
have
of
to be
major
clear.
development. Yes, right. Definition of major development references the number of lots to be created, which is covered by the definitions and requirements for subdivisions. A major site plan is not defined at all. And then it goes on in 16, the township should consider reducing the number of lots that trigger a major subdivision rather than a minor. Currently, any subdivision that results in 4 or fewer lots is considered minor, and any subdivision that creates 4 or more new lots, 5 if the remainder lot is included in the count, is considered a major subdivision. The threshold number of newly created lots should be reduced from 4 to 3 that triggers major rather than minor subdivision review. Did anybody have any problem with that at all?
I thought it was 3.
Well, right now, it's 4 new lots, so 5 total is major. So if you're doing a 10-acre property, you're splitting it into 4 2.5-acre lots, with one of those being the remainder, that's still a minor. unless of course you're extending utilities or new roads.
I did a number, and it was always 3, but
Again, it
I've
depends
never
on
done
what,
one here in Franklin.
right, it depends on what we wanted. Jason's not here, he's a developer, he was adamant against lowering it. I heard Sarah's comments, she was adamant about,
2.
yeah. So there's a compromise here someplace.
I think 3
I think
is
3
a number that, because you look at a person owns land and he wants to, 3 is a good number.
I think so too.
And I'm a developer, I mean, I'm giving up, right?
So let's be clear, 3 to be created, a total of 4, or only 2 to be
No,
created, a
3.
total of 3?
3
Yeah.
to be created is what
3
it
to be
said.
created is fine, 4 would trigger.
I agree.
So in other words, the 3, so the house and 2 is a minor, the house and 3 is a major.
Correct.
Okay, the original house, I'm saying, if there's a
If
lot.
you're creating,
If you're creating 4 lots, that's a major.
Right,
No matter what it is.
even if there's one lot existing.
there always is one lot
Yes.
There's
existing.
always
No, I
one.
mean,
There's always one.
say there's a property with a house on one lot, and now they create 2 new ones. Or do they create 3 new ones? That's,
Well, let's go step by step. Large property has 1 lot,
right,
okay. They want to add a second lot.
right. That's a
Minor,
That's
okay, so we created 1,
Right,
and it's a minor.
right.
Same scenario, now they're creating 2. So there's a total of 3, correct?
Yeah.
The primary, we've used the term the mother lot,
Oh, okay,
The mother lot,
okay.
and 2 more are created, there's a total of 3.
Right.
Is it a major or a minor subdivision according to our new regs?
Minor.
That's still minor.
Again, open for debate,
It's a
but
minor.
minor,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Now we go one more. The existing mother lot,
Right.
and they want to create 3 new lots for a total of 4 lots.
That would-
Is it a major or a minor?
I'd call that a major.
What do you think?
Yeah, current code is minor. Jason, who's not here to speak for himself, but I'm sure when he comes in would say, you know, that should be a
Typically it was
minor.
3. You created 3 new lots, you were.
Essentially what we're talking about here is how many children should property be allowed to
That's a good question.
Let's put a cap on the number of children that
Right.
they have before they need permits for those
Yeah,
children.
because the lot number would still say, stay with the mother lot.
Along that line, we have this thing called a creeping minor or creeping major.
Creeping major.
All right, let's
Well,
go
I
with
think
this.
that's state law or case law, I don't know,
Okay.
it's already in your code, I think, but I think
It
that's
is,
that's
but I
state law
want to
anyway.
confirm. So what Sarah is saying, if you have a lot, just 1, and you want to create 2 more, it's still a minor. When you go to create 3, it becomes a major. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, picture houses now on each.
So there's a total of 4,
Right,
3 newly created.
right.
That's a
Because
major.
the money area comes out of when the person who buys the lot, years down the road decides he wants to
That's where I was headed.
make another lot and he's
Right.
well within his right, and it meets all the requirements.
And
Could
right
it
now,
be
It's
one
a
owner,
7-year, is it, look back?
7
I
year,
believe
whatever?
it's either 3 years or 5 years.
Okay,
Yeah, it's not that long.
okay, I knew it was a period of time. Let's say their subdivision created 3 whole acres with 300 square feet of lineal feet of frontage, obviously large enough for 2 more lots, but initially to stay under the guidelines of a minor, they kept it as a minor. 5 years goes down the road and they split one of those in half, another minor. Agreed?
You could do 10. 10
Well,
years.
I know we
this way.
can.
I'm just saying, it's a
The-
limit.
What in most cases what's gonna trigger something like that becoming a major subdivision is it's very hard to have property where you're splitting it this many times, where you're not creating any new roads to service these new lots, and you're already doing this along existing frontages
Correct.
for every single lot.
Unless the word flag lot
And
enters.
unless it's unless the lot is only 200 feet deep and is 3,000 feet wide of frontage, and you're carving it off, it's gonna be, at some point, they're gonna need to put in some sort of new road, a new cul-de-sac to
Right.
get all these lots, or extend utilities. Eventually, you're gonna run out of frontage and you're building back. Like, in particular, if you look at the map of the town, more of the larger undeveloped lots do have a lot more depth than they do frontage. There's not nearly as many lots that have 5,000 feet of frontage and 200 feet of depth.
We have
The
a lot
other
of,
way around.
Right.
have a lot of landing strips. However, there's a calculation in there that talks about the ratio of frontage to depth, correct?
I think that is I want to say that is a standard for general subdivisions that you're supposed to have a certain, you're not supposed to be doing
There's a
lots that
ratio.
are, I think it's 1.5 to 1 of depth of frontage, something along those lines.
Because typically, if someone comes in today under current law and has the 150 feet, but they might be 4,000 feet deep, they need a variance to get that approved because the ratio is off.
Right. You're right.
It's just a simple, I hate to use the term rubber stamp, but they're always approved because they have the frontage, they have the acreage, they're just a darn airport landing strip,
Bowling alleys around.
whatever.
But is there a problem with that, do you think?
I'm asking the question.
I don't think so.
Now, what if that property gets subdivided and it becomes a flag lot, the second one, correct? Because you'd have to have some kind of access to the back lot.
Well, you're always gonna have, it
Again,
has to come before a board.
That's
They have
another
to ask
variance
for a
if it's a
waiver.
flag lot.
Yeah.
We're talking just straight
Variance.
zoning, 150 feet if it's RA or whatever, straight zoning. There still is a frontage to depth ratio that is a standard. And if the standard is not met, current applicants must request a variance.
So to create a flag lot, you have to get a variance.
That's another story.
Right.
That's
But going back to the original, back to the Sarah Jason scenario, you used a whole lot of words in number 15 that I'd like to see reduced and simplified.
Okay, if I can explain that, right now in your definitions, you have major development and minor development. And major development references the number of new lots to be created, which is at least consistent with the same in the subdivision. Then you have major subdivision and minor subdivision, and I believe minor site plan, and you don't have major site plan at all. My recommendation here is essentially the terms development should specifically should refer you to subdivision and site plan and not have their own definitions. Because every development is going to be either a subdivision or a site plan. So there's no need to have a major development, minor development defined otherwise, except for referencing it's either going to be a major or minor site plan, or not require any sort of site plan and just go straight to get your building permits, or it's a major or minor subdivision. So we have some excess terms.
Can we state this more clear when we get into number 15?
That's the
major
whole point,
versus
is that it's
minor?
not clear, so I wanted to make it confusing in the plan itself. Point out.
Actually, I think it is clear.
I don't think it is.
I can clarify the language here.
Ralph,
Okay.
on what I see where you're not clear. So when you see these old developments that are around these lakes, and like mine, where I live, and where Jason has developed. So, as you see, like somebody who's an old timer who came in and those lots are 100 by 100. I'm talking about Mr. Petrovich. On his street, Jason's been allowed to continue to build 1, 2, 3 houses. And when he got to the end there, he's put in a cul-de-sac, but he never came up to the RSIS to finish the road off. And it's like this creeping division of now it's 4 or 5 lots. You see what I'm saying? That he keeps adding on, but never completing the original plans that were there from the 60s when you moved in. And that's where I'm not sure if like that will be that area that has to be tightened up, because it really doesn't say whether
It needs
whether he can take an old subdivision, you know what I'm saying, and just keep building along as he goes along, but never
if you're-
completing the road.
Subdivision all the time.
So it's
If
creeping
the-
subdivision is
If
what it
if
is.
the lots have already been subdivided, that just haven't been developed, and he's just not developing all 100 of them at once, he's
Correct.
building 5 at a time, that's just a matter of him getting the building permits necessary, assuming that the homes he's building meet all of the zoning requirements.
But he's not putting up a bond to do the road and finish the road and everything else that comes along
That-
with each one.
You're saying the road is currently non-improved.
Remember okay, let's go back to the old subdivision back there, that the 2 guys came in and they wanted to, they were brothers and they were back there near
I know.
Down near Knothnick and all
I
that.
don't know.
And we made him finish the roadway, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it didn't, and that's a subdivision too. And I think that's where we
Well,
come into these
it was a
problems.
subdivision, but the code already does say that you're not, the zoning official and the building construction officer are not supposed to issue permits for any construction on a lot that does not front on an improved street. So if, and I would let Jason speak for himself to whatever he's been doing here,
No,
but
right,
I'd imagine he does have a tough time selling homes anywhere where there's no actual road to get to your home.
well, he did a great job of dumping a lot of stones in there and making it, but it still didn't finish, so school buses can go in, make the proper turn, if that was gonna be, you know what I'm saying, it just kind of finished it at the end there.
Is that a cul-de-sac?
It was supposed to be a cul-de-sac and then continue on to Smallwood, but it hasn't been because it became a creeping subdivision because he's done more than 3 homes. They're beautiful homes. I want you to know, he builds, it's a very nice home. He's really improved the neighborhood. Nobody's saying that bad, but it's not finishing the development that was there because it was from the 1960s. And so when it comes before, it should come before to say, you have to follow this.
That would
That
be
makes sense.
construction.
Well, that goes directly to the zoning and the
It does.
building, because if you buy a subdivision, like if I want to Buck Road, they got a
Right.
urban unit one.
But he just buys lots in,
But
you know,
it's already divided, I could just go with a building permit
right.
and start building.
I'll put
As long
it
as I have
this way.
frontage.
Presumably, whoever got the major I don't know what the laws were in the 60s.
I
We
don't
were
either, I
talking
wasn't here either.
a few decades before I was even born. But
A few
presumably,
decades.
whoever got the original subdivision approved
More than
would have had to put up
7,
some level of bond for the overall improvements
He
as a
did,
major
and then he backed
subdivision.
it up and left, right.
And then if they back up and leave, the township would have that bond to either
And it probably
remove what was
wasn't that
done or
much back
go
then
and
to
finish the
anything, right.
improvements. I don't know.
And it's a huge subdivision back there, as you can see.
I don't know what the requirements would be or what state laws would say in terms of the next developer who comes in who is not necessarily the owner of every single lot in the subdivision and looking for building permits on all of them at the same time, to what degree you can enforce what was supposed to have been done by a previous developer for all of the lots. So if it's an existing lot and it meets all the standards, aside from there needs to be some improvements to the roadway, which you
Right.
should be coming to get a variance for that, or at least requesting it,
He
if it's
did
only,
come in
if it's
for an
only a gravel
interpretation.
road.
No, he did come in for an interpretation one time, and he wanted to do like a thing and just one road around it. The problem was, everybody said, we all bought into this subdivision, and it was never completed. So the people said, we don't care that you build one house at a time, but it's a matter of the roads aren't being done. Do you see what I'm saying? As he's coming
Yeah.
along, he's doing that, so it became a new type of, well, I don't know whether it's new, because it's old, he's trying to follow it.
But
But
the
he's just doing
township would hold the bond, right, for the road
There's no
completion,
money for
correct?
that.
Yeah,
So,
so
That would have been some kind of requirement.
Yeah,
Bond issued at that point.
But again, I'm not even an expert on the bond issues now, so I'm not usually involved in that. I just understand any public improvements are supposed to be bonded, and you don't get that bond released until the township engineer is certified that you have done what you were supposed to do. How that was done in 1965, I don't know. I know the process was similar even back then, but
It'd be like Glassboro, you put up a bond, they do the work, and then you wait for them to give you back your money for the work that they did. How crazy
I
is
mean,
that?
I don't know.
well, like in this case, I mean, obviously you're looking at, between 60 and 80 years, some of these, because some of these have been created that long ago, in the 50s through the 70s. So obviously the money back then may have put $10,000 away for this road, and now it's gonna be, $350,000 to finish that cul-de-sac. How does that equate for the residents?
I don't know if the bond was in an interest-bearing account 80 years ago, maybe it's worth a lot now.
Depends on which bank.
You have to find out what bank has it.
Yeah, it should all be bonded.
But I'm just curious on
I just thought
how that works with the age.
No, but when you were
I
saying the
honestly
creeping
don't
thing, I think that has to be tightened up maybe to talk about that in some of these areas. It's not all over the township, but it is.
Bottom line, we're dropping the threshold by 1, and
Yes.
what gets in a major subdivision.
Right. And since Jason isn't here.
It's killing me to do it, just so that you know that.
I know it is, I know it is.
We appreciate the flexibility in your arm that's behind your back.
I appreciate
When
it.
Jason gets here, we'll tell him all year
I typically don't build in front of you.
I forget to mention, but
That's the only reason you're willing to go.
Well, I'm going on Nelson, but, I'm not, I typically don't.
You're gonna define development and subdivision
Major site
and site plan,
Okay, well,
right?
for that, at this point, I just said it needs to be clarified
Right.
what's going on. I haven't gone through and come up with my own definitions just yet. It's not so much that any one of the definitions is bad, just that you have 5 different definitions where it really should be 4 things, and one major site plan should be specified what exactly it is.
On the comparison between major and minor, if we're not in the Pinelands today, a grading plan is not needed.
I believe right now a grading plan is being required by the township for all development, regardless of whether they're coming before a
Excess
board or
of
not.
disturbance, a number.
I don't know that they actually have a number right now for it. This is why one of the things I put in here, a standard of grading plans are not required if you're doing, as we discussed, a very small development.
You said 400 square
I
feet.
said
or
400
less.
square feet, I'm certainly open to discussion on what that number is. But the idea being, if you're doing a very small development, essentially putting in a shed that you got from Home Depot or Lowe's, and you're just dropping it in your backyard, and you're 100 feet away from any property line,
No grading plan
you
required.
should not need to have an engineer prepare a formal grading plan for you to certify that you're not draining new stormwater.
Suppose you just bought an 1.5 acre lot and you want to build one home. You have your frontages, you're going to build an 1,800 square foot rancher. So now you're disturbing more than 400 square foot, and you're saying then a grading plan would be mandatory.
Right now, the township is requiring those, yes, at least demonstrate that you're not adversely impacting any drainage onto your neighboring property.
Define right now, how long has this been in existence?
I don't know, at least the past couple of years.
Yeah, on a
Okay.
couple.
I don't
always
think
get
there
a
was any,
grading plan only because it protects you as a builder.
I don't
And
think there was
it's
any
a
change in the
professional
code, I think it was just a
opinion.
change in the way that we
I'm not
interpreted it.
approaching anybody.
Right now, the code just says
I've
you're not
always done
allowed to
that,
do
but
any,
a
have
lot
any
of people
adverse
don't wanna
impacts
spend
on
the
your
money.
neighbors.
Obviously.
And so us as the township engineer, I've been interpreting that lately to say that we want to see a grading plan so you're demonstrating that you're not adversely impacting your neighbors. And what this would say is,
The only thing I
It's a really small
oppose is
beginning,
another
essentially.
escrow that you have. Because people come out, and here's the biggest problem, and everybody knows it. They'll come out, and one guy, I come out, and he just got there, pulls up, he goes, yeah, you failed. For what? You're about an inch off when you're grading. So really, how do you know that? I can tell. You have no equipment here, you have nothing. What do you know,
You can train.
but they're just justifying taking the escrow. And that's the only thing that, like, typically I build medical centers. The first thing I do with the mayor and every engineer, I say, I don't care if you take all the escrow. Just don't stop me. Because all you're doing is stopping the development by justifying stealing the escrow. And that's the truth. I mean, that's just the way it is. And a lot of these builders like Jason, everybody's gonna say the same thing. Like, if there was just a standard fee that you paid, and not them just trying to come back and try to do multiple inspections and look at this pot of $4,000 they have to grab. And how do I justify grabbing it? They keep coming out and failing it. And that's what I don't like about it.
You mean there's a lack of integrity in some professionals?
You want to build things right. It's
Yeah.
good for
Oh,
everyone.
of course.
But at some point, I mean, I don't care if it's one fee. Take it all. At least you know what you're paying. But instead, it's like, how do I get all this money? Stop the builder, stop the builder, stop the builder, stop the builder. You get response back. It'd be like 2 sentences. Then I come back, respond, I get another 2. Then I get another 2. Just say, bill. Take it all. Like, how do you put that into an ordinance? I don't know if you can, but.
considering you're talking about other employees of CV, maybe I should not be speaking, but clearly a conflict of interest with
Oh, yes, I'm
companies.
fine, I just want to
Yes.
stop off a little bit, I guess. I'm sorry, I apologize.
Which is fine.
I apologize.
That's fair.
I apologize.
I do, being in the same office as many of them, I hear the other side of that story many times where they come in and say some developer built something, they're way off, and they're calling and complaining that why did we not pass them? So
Absolutely, I agree with that, but
now whether or not certain inspectors are being a little too strict, that's not really for me to say.
They have to be able to justify what they're rejecting.
Right,
yes.
Somebody to come in and say to him, He's off an inch with no measuring equipment.
I'm gonna tell you something, you ask a couple of lawyers in town who have to represent the builders, and ask them how many times they failed on the septic now. This, your company, your firm, is for the grading. And I bet you most of them, and most of them is the elevation, by an inch, half inch, it's an acre site.
Do they prove it?
Oh, they have to be graded, you have to spend money. No, back out. I don't wanna say the guy's name, but it sits on the planning board, he did nothing, pull him back and he passed
Tell
him.
you you're off an inch, but show me
You have
how.
to show you.
Well, like I said, the one guy had nothing, he had
Then-
no equipment,
Then
zero
you
equipment.
can't reject it. You can't prove it.
But they
That's what I'm
went out.
saying, I hope you have a good attorney.
Well, I'm just saying, but that, you can say whatever you want, let's say, yeah, I did do that.
I think we should go on to
It's not right.
fences.
Yeah, let's go on.
I'm sorry,
But every line has a thorn in its paw somewhere.
You're justified, but we need to.
okay, I'm sorry.
This is our last yellow highlighted section.
Yeah, so this is new, and this is not a recommendation we had discussed. This is, basically for any master plan or re-examination report, not a full-blown new master plan, but for a re-examination report, the board secretary has a card she can play where whatever she wants to see go into the ordinance, she's allowed to just insert it, no questions asked. That's what this is.
All right.
Now, I'm joking there, of course, but this was, Chrissy had mentioned to me that there's been several variances coming before the zoning board for a fence in a side yard being more than 4 feet high. And that they're essentially being granted as a rubber stamp almost. And so I did look into that, and most towns that I work in, I like the idea of fences in a front yard being reduced in height to 4 feet and being open, so you don't want to see it, especially in a residential area, someone's front yard being completely walled off. But the side yard, I see no reason why that couldn't also be 6 feet in height, 'cause it's more akin to the same as the rear yard. But the current ordinance says that the side yard up to even on the side of the house, it has to be a 4 foot maximum. And usually a side yard should be treated more like a rear yard, where that could be the area where you have, you let your dogs out and things like that. You might need a 6 foot fence there. It's not having the same visual impact that a fence on the front yard would have.
That seemed fine to me.
So we can build a 6-foot fence in our side and backyard. If we want to build a taller one, we have to come in for a variance. But we don't need to come in for a variance if we want to build a lower one.
No, if you want to build a 2 foot fence, you're allowed to. I don't know what you're going to do with a 2 foot fence. And close your garden.
That's allowed.
Yeah.
Have you seen my goal?
Yeah, so that, I didn't think would require much discussion, but that's
No, that's it.
the reason why this is the only new thing in here under recommendations not yet discussed, because we hadn't discussed that before.
So, on to the big ones. 19, the warehouses. We need to consider amendments to the zoning code to address the issues presented by larger warehouse and distribution facilities. And of course, the state guidance document was sent to everybody, and also the West Hampton study and ordinance, which I thought were great.
I like that,
And
yeah.
I wish that we could, for the master plan purposes, you did the actual study. And can we get one done here?
On the same line of discussion we were just saying, CME Associates will be telling me my official position is yes, for large sums of money, we'll do a massive study. But frankly speaking, I don't think it's necessary, since these studies have been done elsewhere, we've come up with standards elsewhere. I don't remember exactly our budget for that master plan portion in West Hampton. I want to say it was around 15,000 and then another 5,000 or 10,000 to draft the actual ordinance and work with the council. I don't think Franklin needs to spend that much money on this exercise specific to Franklin. We should be able to take some of these standards that have been done in another town and tweak them to some degree to make them fit here.
I like the specificity of the West Hampton ordinance. I like that, it's got everything, it seems to have everything in it. Definitions of all the different kinds of warehouses, how they're conditional use, the parking, the design standard where it doesn't, they say don't make it look like a warehouse. I mean, I love everything. And I just like the way it's so complete.
However,
I thought I sent it to everybody, yeah.
there's
Check that if you want, that's
I
the
would
master plan
reference
report.
that in the master plan,
Well-
because what happened in West Hampton is they referenced the study as part, and that's adopted as part of the master plan.
Oh.
The technical study, so,
What we're referencing already in here in this recommendation is the state guidance document, which largely was the guidance I used when I put together the West Hampton plan and ordinance and what the subcommittee they had there that we all used, as well as the other document that, I forget who sent the email, but, I think it was an American Planning Association article about, regulating
When they're
warehouses.
coming, there's
Last
Last
Mile,
Mile, there's West Hampton Distribution. There was one about when a warehouse comes to your town or
Yeah.
something.
That, we had looked at that article as well. So there's a couple of ways we can go here. We can simply, as it said here, reference the state guidance. I don't know that it'd be appropriate to specifically reference another town's master plan, but I can take the standards in that master plan and literally copy them into here, and maybe not getting down to that level of specificity, but at least for the master plan purposes for a re-exam, simply stating that different types of warehouses should be treated as conditional uses, and with this idea of the bigger the warehouse, the more buffering and more protections are required.
Traffic impact studies, I mean, if there was a way to turn this ordinance into a I mean, I even like the idea that it's streets that the trucks can't go down.
right, yeah.
This is just, it's.
Well, to put it this way, any ordinance is gonna have to come back to this body to see if it's consistent with the master plan. And what I would be doing essentially is assuming some recommendation, that whether it's this recommendation verbatim or some other tweaked wording of this, and then the council says, okay, CME, we need to update our ordinances now to be consistent with this master plan. What are we gonna do about these warehouses? I can say, well, here's what we did in West Hampton. The board seems to think something like this would be very appropriate. We can literally take that West Hampton ordinance and tweak it a little bit to be for Franklin Township, and obviously change the zoning districts where the conditional uses are permitted. But I think that, aside from the individual things in that code and that master plan, I think the important discussion for us tonight would be, under the assumption that warehouses will be permitted as conditional uses rather than outright permitted uses, what are the zoning districts you think they would be appropriate to go in with
I
these
agree.
protections?
Exactly, that's really the issue, and the problem.
I mean, we need to discuss, we have about 5 different commercial zones. Highway commercial, light manufacturing, business mixed use, IC, okay? I guess, and then we got the Pinelands Highway Commercial as well, okay? So it's Pinelands Highway Commercial, it's light manufacturing, it's interchange commercial, and then of course the Fries Mill Road area with business mixed use. Those are the areas of our township that have any commercial zoning where a warehouse may or could be built. So at this point, we need to determine just where do we want to build these warehouses.
Or not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Ralph, does the interchange still have no warehousing as it did years ago when we went through this at 55
It
and
doesn't-
40?
It doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think warehousing would be permitted in the IC zone right now.
Or the H6.
I think it's
Or
only
use.
available in the light manufacturing.
It's definitely
Yeah.
available, warehousing permitted in the light manufacturing, I think it's also permitted in the business zone.
Where
Okay.
is our light manufacturing? Is that where the new solar one just went?
No, light manufacturing is technically Meredith Farms,
Okay,
Maine and 40,
okay, thank you.
and there's
On Lake
another
Road,
one,
there's one.
way out on, I guess that's, what the heck is this?
Lake Road, I believe, has one.
Yes, it does, that's where the marijuana grow facility
And where
is.
the affordable housing is supposed to go.
Here's the ring.
Near that.
Yeah.
Right there.
There's some
There's a
on
40 going towards Elmer.
the Railroad Ave, down here on
Right.
Northwest Boulevard,
So
That's
that's,
the lake.
so that's not Malaga, and a couple different areas on Harding Highway.
And in the Ville, I think, in Franklinville, there's.
yes, the
Okay,
west side,
wait.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah, west side.
the purple office.
There's also a,
So
like,
this is where the rubber meets the road.
manufacturing
Change
Highland
interchange.
area that also might qualify.
Yeah, it's called the P Allen Pinewood Light Manufacturing. There are a couple of smaller, well,
They're tiny.
hard to tell how big these properties are just looking at this map. It looks small on the map, but that might be 3 acres. Yeah, I don't want to scale with me to see.
They're strangely located, I wasn't sure why.
I couldn't tell you, I don't know the history behind it, but there are 2 Pinelands light manufacturing districts in town.
Okay, thank you.
So I mean, with that, I don't personally have a specific recommendation to say that this is where they should go, this is where they shouldn't go, other than obviously you want to keep the warehouses out of any residential areas, so the RA district and the villages, I don't think.
Are out,
there.
and I mentioned all the others except those.
What about Harvest Farms?
Well, let's discuss Meredith Farms. We no longer own it.
Right.
Okay, and there is no pending applications.
Right.
So if we wanted to change the zoning, we could, because it doesn't impact any
Well,
Maybe not.
applications.
You
that one is subject to a developer's agreement already, and I've been through court, and since it got, I think it was DEA that gave the township a grant that says it has to be a jobs creation site. Warehouse might be okay in terms of that. I think there's already developers agreement that's been signed, although I might be wrong there. I just know that has a lot of other things going on there that trying to change the zoning there is
Not domestic.
not as simple as it would be anywhere else in town where you
Okay.
just introduce the ordinance and notify the property owners. There's a lot of other pieces to that.
It's also not ideal because when you imagine trucks coming off of 55 and trying to get
Oh,
all
it's
the way
far.
over, it's far. And they would have to go through and make all those bends in pretty little Malabar.
Yeah, but if you're against something, the further away it is, the less people want to
Do it.
develop.
Yeah.
Right. You don't entice somebody.
So it could be a
I mean, I'm just saying, however you want to do it, but.
Now, that one could be last mile, couldn't it?
Yes, it could be, and the trucks still have to get to it in order to.
Right. But it wouldn't have the, I can't imagine having the tractor trailer traffic that, huge, warehouse, 500 square foot warehouse, there would be more vans and cars, but the tractor
No,
trailer.
going from it would be vans and cars.
Right.
But getting the product to it
Is tractor.
is
How-
tractor trailer.
Would it be as intensive as the larger ones? That's what.
I think it would be, actually.
If I was a
Going
developer,
through
I
the
would
middle of
never
Malabar,
go.
I would say.
I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. It doesn't make economic sense.
Also, the Meredith Farm site, at least the biggest issue is getting water on that site. So any use that's going to require water is almost a non-starter. I think it was a few years back, but the estimate to get water on that site was several million dollars in startup costs, plus I think it was either 500,000 or maybe 800,000 annually in maintenance costs. 500,000. There's some issues with that site, but if anything is going to happen, there's got to be something that does not require any water.
And I guess cold storage requires water.
Probably.
Probably.
And a lot of electricity.
I don't know, a lot of electricity, yeah. Because cold storage would be, seem to be the most appropriate use.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to find any site in the township where you're gonna get this 1,000 feet from existing residents. To a
Well-
building.
That could be true. I mean, the only one is the interchange site.
But there's a handful of homes in there.
Yeah,
There are.
You can make a condition on, it's a condition that is acceptable, but when it gets down to it, it's really not acceptable.
We don't have a lot of, we don't have, like, West Hampton has, major arteries.
Yes.
We don't have major interstate arteries.
Except
Route
for
40 is a
55.
2-lane road. 55 only, stops partway to the shore and merges with 42. We don't
Yes.
really have the good transportation sector that makes it more appealing.
Yeah, well, West Hampton's a miracle there aren't more warehouses with 3 interchanges there.
There's a few more that have been approved recently.
Yeah.
I will say in West Hampton, as part of our discussions there, they rezoned 2 large properties that had a warehouse proposed on them where the town had denied the application. That denial is still in court right now. And so we rezoned the properties to residential where they're adjacent to a school, adjacent to residences. But then sort of as compensation to say, okay, we've identified all these criteria where we think warehouses are appropriate. So we did pick out a site in town that's literally right next to the turnpike in the middle of a commercial area, no residences around it, and say, okay, we'll rezone this to now permit warehouses there. And within a couple of months, we got an application for a warehouse there. And that got approved maybe just a couple of months ago.
Yeah, because I mean, major arteries and.
Yeah, they've got 295 and the turnpike, and then they're all connected by county highways. So certainly the demand for warehouse space in West Hampton is a lot more than it is in Franklin, which is why
I
we see
just,
so many.
to be honest with you, I just don't see why a warehouse developer would even want to build in this township, because you've only got 55, right? And the object of these buildings, these fulfillment houses, are to move things in and out as fast as possible. And so if all of your deliveries are held up and sitting at traffic lights or on small 2-lane highways, that's just not an efficient use of these facilities. So I just don't, we can fret over this and worry about what's going to come into these specific zones, but a builder, an investor is just not going to put that kind of money into that kind of a facility if he can't get the right use out of it.
Although they're putting in a warehouse in, right down 55.
Gershel Avenue.
Yeah.
Where?
Gershel
Yeah.
Avenue at the land
Oh,
is.
Norma.
Where is it?
Norma.
It's considered
It's
Pittsgrove.
Grove Township.
Right, so it's near
It's about,
50,
but it's right
It's
near-
near-
It's 55 and Landis.
Yeah, so that's,
On Gershel.
That's why.
So that good butcher shop is too.
Yeah, Joe's Butcher Shop.
Butchers, yeah.
Big difference, violence.
So that's
That's how I know everything.
That's Salem County there.
and that's right next to 55 also. But and actually, one going in there would seem to make the need for one in Franklin even less. But
Right.
what
But-
is going in?
You
there.
never know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
I
They're doing
guess-
a lot of it on speculation. I mean,
I know,
Yeah.
but still, but you can speculate all you want, but if you don't have the access to in and out quickly, it just that doesn't make sense. To put that kind of money to work.
What it is, I completely agree with Jim that I don't know that the market is there, and to my knowledge, we don't have developers knocking on the town's door every day saying we want to build warehouses, where can we do it? But if you don't have standards in place, if the ordinance is not there and somebody does come and say, I want to build, if a warehouse is listed as a permitted use, then right now they're subject to just the general requirements of anything in that district.
I think it shouldn't be a permitted use, no matter, conditional is at the very least, should be conditional, wherever it is, or.
yes, I think we should definitely try to incorporate the recommendations into the master plan that are appropriate. That don't even reference the ordinance, but reference the elements of the ordinance, like the need for traffic studies, the need for conditional use, the need for standards. We need some paragraphs on that.
Okay.
The buffer.
Chris, I came in late, and I missed the beginning piece of this, but my thought there is I'm hearing 1,000 foot from a residential structure. What about, rather than identifying it that way, what about preventing warehousing from residential streets? So if they're gonna build a warehouse, they gotta be on it has to be accessible from a county or a state highway. Which gets us, which now, by doing that, you've protected all the residents on the residential street side of it, and rather than trying to identify pieces of property, you've identified the ability to get access to it and keep them on the county road and the state highways.
Sure, I can make another suggestion. We didn't do this in West Hampton, and frankly, I don't usually see this too often because it's a little bit ambiguous, but rather than identifying specific zones where it would be permitted as a conditional use, there's essentially a zoning technique called a floating zone, where you're not identifying specific boundaries on a map that says this is where warehouses are permitted, but it could just be any non-residential district, and then under these conditions of direct access to a state or county highway and a certain property size, then they're permitted, without having to say the LM district or the PLM or the highway commercial. That you essentially just set the conditions of, as long as you're not on a residential street and you're not in a residential district, then it's permitted under
And
certain
it won't
conditions.
exist, there won't be a place.
Yeah, because we got residential districts everywhere, so I mean,
That's
all on
great.
county
Yeah,
roads.
I like that, I like that.
Plus all the setbacks,
I
and
think
everything could be upped.
Yeah, and then you have
Right.
specific standards for warehouses
No, 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 really.
without saying exactly that it's these particular districts.
Yeah, I like that,
That's an option.
yeah,
I
I think
like
that
the
makes a lot
setback.
of sense.
To the existing dwellings. I mean, if everyone in the town deserves a rural environment and they have a pre-existing dwelling, they should be protected. 1,000 feet from the building, you know, that's not really that, you know, there's still other things on the site that are gonna be closer, like roadways and basins, you know, and having a decent buffer isn't gonna prohibit somebody who has a large site from, you know, but being 1,000 feet where your house actually is from the building is gonna eliminate a lot of that noise, a lot of that pollution, a lot of the problems of the interaction between an existing house and a warehouse, no matter whether you live on Route 40, which we're recommending part of that be turned into residential again, or whether you live in a neighborhood street. I think everyone pays the same taxes here. They deserve the same protections in the same rural environment, whether you live in a supposed neighborhood, or you happen to live on a county road, or you happen to live on a state road. You deserve the same rights. You're paying the same taxes.
Just layer it over, it's
So,
like stringent setbacks.
Chris, can we start out by
Setbacks
saying
are needed.
And then you have
warehouses
to
are
come before a board for a
prohibited
variance.
from any township road? Without using the word
Probably say
state,
that. Well, it'd be easier to say they have to have direct
state
access from a
or
state or county
or
highway,
State or county, yeah.
rather than saying
Can-
prohibited from a local road.
Okay,
And
and then
non-residential.
But of course, that's a lot of
in
roads.
any non-residential zone,
There's a lot of county roads that are,
I know.
Which, by the way, I think maybe we should skip to 23, which is the thing about rezoning 40. I never looked at 40 like that till I went to Lavari's today, and coming back, I'm like, this is totally residential.
Yeah.
And there's not even a place to put a commercial thing in there.
Yet it's zoned highway commercial.
Yeah, and I didn't like it when that was originally
Starting to sound like
started.
Jason.
Everything where I live is county,
I'll give you,
built in the 40s.
I'll give you an example of, I live between two state highways on a small little residential road. Prior to that property being cleared right near 55, that I'm gonna classify it as a Fasco property, because everybody will know it. Prior to that being cleared, I could not hear Route 55, except in the dead of winter when there were leaves on the trees, and you could barely hear it unless a truck hit the rumble strips or one of the expansion bridges. And it was barely. Now, it sounds like 55's in my backyard, even during the middle of summer, because of all those trees that were cleared.
So if you make it on the state highways, which is Route 40, I agree with Mr. Petch about, and because he was mayor at the time, and if you remember when they used to come off of 55, and even though RLS, who I love the Leo family, I want to make that, and what their operation is beautiful out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody's gonna argue. It's on a county road, but the problem we have, Joe, as you remember, at these meetings, when the truck traffic would come down, they'd come right down Dutch Mill.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And
that's why
every
we
single
and
person
that's
that's
why we
having,
prohibit them from being on
and so we put them on the
residential
county route, and now, as we know, how many years later, they're finally widening it as it has to be to get them to the county route.
Right.
So
street. After
even
a
though,
friend of Steve Sweeney's had an accident at the
well, you know,
intersection.
he did want me to come and take his picture with Mr. Hogan, so I can only tell you that they did call me, but they never came through that year. He didn't win. So
Funny how things happen.
funny how things happen like that. But no, the county highway, even though we're making them, depending on where they're at, it does make a big difference, because as they gotta get there, there's GPS takes them the alternate route, and they're right on your, you know, where.
Yep.
So I know we had many times when people were screaming that this is coming through, and it has a major impact. So warehouses, or whether they're big box stores, because anything that's a Walmart, a BJ's, or any of those, they're warehouses. So if you leave that open to your commercial district, like you were saying about the housing and all that, it changes the amount of traffic coming through.
I mean,
Because you can get right off of 55 and
yeah, just the part that I looked at, which was just from Tuckahoe down to
you know, from
Lavari.
Tuckahoe, look at the
It was like
increase
all
in time.
residential. And I kept looking, there's no place to put anything on 40, so why Why make it
warehouses
highway
to me is
commercial?
not being rural. It changes your rural character.
Yeah.
So I'm clear what we're discussing here. Are we entertaining conditional uses for warehousing in Franklin Township? Is that what we're trying to do?
We're trying to establish the language,
Right.
not to prohibit it, but to appear to be friendly, yet at the same time to have so many restrictions that make it cost prohibitive. Does that sound, Jim?
Well,
But
yeah,
is it necessary?
really well put.
Yeah,
Is
it's
an ordinance-
necessary in the,
If an ordinance is silent, it's assumed it's a prohibited use.
Now,
If it's silent, the opposite happens. They come in and tell us what they want.
Oh,
We have
it
no way to
all depends.
silence.
We did have this discussion last month, and if something is not listed, it's generally assumed to be prohibited unless you can put it into a category of, like, most towns have something that just says, light industrial uses are permitted, and plenty of warehouse developers will try and say, well, we're just light industrial, this happens to be a 500,000 square foot,
Right.
they can be light industrial building. But right now, warehousing already is permitted within the code, so if you went in and deleted that from the code, that is a very strict, very clear, you are now prohibiting warehouses, and it's not something that was just an error of omission.
we're gonna lose in court.
And a warehouse developer, if they wanted to, could challenge that and would probably say that that's,
We're,
you're not allowed to do that. It's
Well, you actually can, if you do it the entire Franklin Township map, you can do it that way, and it's perfectly legal. You can't have certain areas that you designate without a conditional. So you can actually say no warehouses in Franklin Township, and that is legal.
I would.
I disagree with you. That's just like saying you can't have an adult bookstore anywhere in Franklin Township.
Well, there are towns that do it.
Well,
Our town does that. We don't have
And
no
it turns like a lot of money.
Yeah, it can get kind of open up the town. So
Well, it can, but we also have enough lawsuits now, so what's the difference if you have it when you pay for it's right?
I will put it this way.
I think you just make a lot of conditional uses.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you make
I
it
think
so
if you-
stringent
Yeah.
that, that the setbacks are so stringent, they have to come before the board. And you make it so tough for them, it's not gonna happen, it's all money.
I'm all for the
Figure it out,
stringent
and it
part,
doesn't
for
make
warehouses.
sense.
That doesn't bother me, I just don't wanna see somebody's backbone become jello when the time comes.
Yep.
That's my concern, the stringent part is good.
Right.
Right now, they're listed as a permitted use in several districts. If you make it a conditional use, then if they do not meet all of those conditions, they have to go to the zoning board